I was always different than the other girls. For one thing, I was deemed less pretty than the other girls in my school, and they always thought I was more boyish than the rest of them. Another thing, maybe the most important thing, was that I could see light when I got angry and burn everything in my path. Funny how I always seemed to do that, both literally and figuratively. Standing in front of my classmates yet again, I was listening to their taunts. I felt myself heat up. This happened every time I was angry. She's so different from the rest. She's rather ugly, isn't she? I don't think any boy would go for a girl like that. Don't make her angry, or she'll come undone. You know they call her Dragon Girl. They started laughing at this statement. Sometimes I wonder if they thought I didn't have feelings just because I had special abilities. I felt the anger coursing through me as they kept speaking and making taunts in my direction. One of the girls pushed me and I fell back, hitting me behind on the floor. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and yelled back at them. I couldn't stop myself, and I realized it before it was too late. I had consumed everything in my path. There was a lot of damage done, Mr. Kelly, I heard an officer say to someone standing beside me. I was covered with a towel as the siren sounded, and the firefighters filled surroundings around me. I heard my father grunt beside me, shaking his head in shame. His daughter had done it again, bringing dishonor to the family. He and my mother had always tried to change me, to make me a better person, but it never turned out the way they wanted it to. And who could blame them? I was the one that couldn't control my powers, not them. We're so sorry for the damage, I heard him say to the fireman beside him. Rest assured, we will pay for everything, and a generous donation will go to the school. Help everyone recover. He said the last bit quietly, and I knew what he meant. It was a bribe to keep their mouths shut. He didn't want anyone to find out about this. It would be bad for my father. He was one of the most prestigious businessmen in town. This wouldn't be good publicity for him. He shook hands with the man while I kept my head down, afraid to look into his disappointed face, because I knew he wore that expression as he spoke. It's time to go home, he said stiffly, placing a hand on my shoulder to direct me towards his car, parked not far away from the school's grounds. Your mother will be so disappointed, Grace. I winced. Using my middle name was always a way of communicating the disdain my parents sometimes felt for me. It always made me shiver. It meant things had gone terribly. I walked towards the passenger side of the car. I could feel the eyes looking at me intently. It was always unnerving because it never helped that I had crippling anxiety. I got into the car as quickly as possible, staring out of the window beside me. Luckily, the car was parked across the street from the school, and I didn't have to look at the school from my side of the vehicle. My dad got in and started the ignition, and his large form slumped down a bit when the car began to move away from the school. I knew he would say something soon, so I had to brace myself for it, but there was only silence, at least for a while. When we had gotten reasonably far from the school, he cleared his throat and slowed the sedan into the traffic in front of us. You know we always try our best to help you, but, he said with a defeated sigh as he turned to look at my face. I tried to turn away, but my father always felt some way about looking away from him when he spoke. I didn't have a choice but to look at him. But it's hard to take care of someone like you. He looked away, focusing on the road before him. I, on the other hand, turned to face the window again. I felt tears leak from my face furiously. It would always be like this. I would always be a freak. I was going to be someone like you to everyone around me. I didn't ask for these abilities. Sometimes I wish they would go away. But like everything that happens just before you go to bed, it's real and stays. You only get that moment you're sleeping to wish it away. But as soon as your eyes open, you'll be faced with the cruel truth. This was my cruel truth. I'm sorry, I whispered as I cried silently, hoping he didn't notice I was crying. I was probably unaware that we had already gotten home, but I realized it quickly once the car door swung open and I came face to face with my mother. She stood, tall and proud, just like her husband. I always felt a stark contrast between her and me when I stood beside her. She was elegant, a sophisticated woman that everyone looked up to, and I, on the other hand, was rough and always getting into trouble. I wasn't elegant. Hovering over me with my father next to her, my mother seized me up and shook her head furiously. "How many times would this happen?" she boomed, her voice holding the anger I had just let go of a couple of hours ago. Funny, that always seemed to be the only thing we had in common. "It's not my fault, Mom," I said. "They were teasing me." "What have I said about that?" I let out a sigh and repeated the words she had constantly drummed into my ears. I should always report to a teacher around me. "And did you do that?" she asked. I already knew where this was heading. "They don't understand, Mom," I said, a little bit irritated. "No one does." "Well, you have to stop acting like a brat, and then maybe someone will pay you to heed." "You're an awful person," found myself saying. My feet seemed to work on their own too. I found myself running out of the yard and into the streets beyond. My parents' cries for me to come back were lost in the sea of thoughts swimming in my head. I walked a long distance, taking a detour into the park, far from home, when I felt the need to stop and finally let it all out. I screamed as loud as I could into the empty park and finally cried, the tears falling nonstop. The sky seemed to call with me. There was a rumble and then a sudden downpour, sending me running for shelter under one of the oak trees. I huddled up, crying my eyes out. Why me? Why are all these things happening to me? I felt a presence next to me and quickly lifted my head. Well, 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 if it isn't Miss Dragon Girl. A girl taunted me as she walked towards me. It was one of the teasers from my school that my blast hadn't injured. She came forward and a group of girls followed after. I don't want any trouble, I quivered, backing further into the tree. I didn't want to start anything with these girls. "We know," she replied. "Get her, girls." It happened at once, and before I knew it, the girls were all over me. They were kicking and hitting me as I lay immobile on the ground. I felt the anger in me rise, and my body began to heat up. As the beatings became more intense, then I realized I couldn't attack. This is what my mother had yelled about, what my parents had been talking about. There was no teacher to report to, but I had to stay in check, so I laid quietly, the pain increasing with each blow I was given. The girls began to laugh, and their leader said, "That's enough for today. She'll think twice about showing her ugly face around here ever again." The rain came down twice as hard as I laid bloody on the ground, the water washing over me. I kept thinking maybe this was it. I'd go into the light and never be bothered again, or perhaps they'd have to bother again. I felt the presence next to me. I didn't bother to look this time. I was sure it was one of the girls, back to do their dirty bidding. "Why are you on the floor?" a male voice called out. "Are you crying, or is it just the rain?" I didn't know who it was, but I didn't want anyone to see me in this state as I cried miserably. "Please leave me alone. They've already done their part," I yelled, but he chuckled. "You need a helping hand." He put his hand on mine, and I realized they were so warm. It was almost as if he had pulled them out of an oven. I looked up at his face and gasped. You're a dragon," I exclaimed. He laughed again, lifting me off the ground. He put his hands on my wounds, and I began to feel the pain go away. "You're a smart one, aren't you?" he said over the loud sounds of water hitting the ground. "Let's get you somewhere dry." In an instant, the rain stopped. I looked around us, and it was still raining, but it wasn't coming anywhere near us. It just fell around us. I marveled at this, forgetting the incidents that had just occurred. I had never seen magic up this close. "I've been watching you," he said. "You're special." "I'm not. I'm a freak," I replied, turning away from him to face the park around me. My eyes were still focused on the rain. "You're not a freak, if that's what you're trying to tell me." "I am," I said, a little bit annoyed as I began to heat up again. I hated that no one could understand me. I didn't realize it, but I was releasing smoke, and I let out a little roar, and fire erupted from my hands. "See? This is what I'm talking about," I yelled, the fire growing in my hands. "I'm a freak. I'm the dragon girl who can't keep herself in check." He stared at me for a while, contemplating something, then walked towards me, placing a hand on my shoulders. "Maybe you're different. and can't keep yourself in check. But you're not a freak, Grace. You need somebody that understands you." He turned towards the sky and let out a roar, fire flowing out of his mouth into the clouds above. "Come on, you give it a try," he urged. "You've got marvelous fire techniques." I let out a little awkward laugh. No one had ever said that to me before. I let out a roar and fire erupted. He continued to laugh as he rose to the air. I knew what was happening. He was transforming into a full dragon. I looked away. You weren't supposed to look at them when they transformed. After a bright light flashed, I knew he had changed. "You're not so different, you know," he said again. "I'm always here.